Right. Five, four, three, two, one.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim Eskin. On behalf of Eskin Fundraising Training, welcome to our nonprofit webinar series. And this is number 49 in our series. This one's promoting racial harmony. And by the way, I'm glad it is this day, but it actually turned out to be accidental timing. Lionel and Seth, today is the Jewish holiday of Yom Yashoah, which is the day in Israel and around the world for remembering the Holocaust. There were 11 million lives lost during the Holocaust. 6 million were Jewish and 5 million were not Jewish. And we also honor not just the evil that was done, but there was the courageous. And when I think of courage, moral courage, I think of the pastor, the Lutheran pastor Martin Niemöller, who's had a quote. I heard it about 40 years ago, and I just always have loved it. He said he met Hitler and he totally rejected Nazism. He served 7 years in concentration camps. He said, first they came for socialists, and I didn't speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jewish people, and I didn't speak out because I was not Jewish. Then they finally came to me for me, and there was nobody left to speak out. And today we're going to talk about speaking out. I'm overwhelmed by the talent of my two guests. One, I'll first start with Lionel Sosa, who describes himself as a serial dabbler. I'm going to describe you, Lionel, if it's okay, as a Renaissance man. And actually, I'm kind of mad at Lionel. He can do so many different things well. In my life, I've met people who could write or could be graphic artists. Well, he was great at both those things. And then people who write books or people who paint portraits, he can do both those things. And amazing. He's been an advisor to three presidents of the United States, 8 presidential campaigns, numerous Fortune 500 companies. His most important job description is a husband, father, grandfather, great grandfather. Lionel, give me an establishing shot. How many Sozas are in your family?
Well, there's 8 kids and their spouses. There's 27 grandkids, and most of them have spouses. And then there's uh, 30 great grandkids. And so I've lost count. There's a
Even okay. Hey, let's start digging in. We want to learn about this new project, Living in My Skin, that you just painted the portraits. I think it was 33 African Americans, ages 10 to 90. I'm going to start with a big question, okay?
okay.
What does it take to make a best effort to truly understand what it is like to live in someone else's colored skin?
Well, I didn't consciously intend to do any of this, but I was walking down the street one morning, walking our dogs. Kathy and I were doing that, and we saw a poster in a window that said, "You can't be anti-racist unless you're actively anti-racist."
I love that
And
thought.
this was a week after the George Floyd uh, killing.
Mm.
And of course, people were seeing it online. They were watching the video over and over and over. And the awareness of what happens to Black men, I think, got higher and higher and higher. And then division came to our country. Uh, Trump had one point of view and what he thought about Black Lives Matter. Black people had another point of view. But I always thought that, that type of thing happens in other cities. It couldn't happen in San Antonio. I mean, this is a city that's 65% Hispanic.
Sure.
It's majority minority, and although there's only 7% black population in San Antonio, we have the largest MLK march in the country. We've elected a black woman Republican mayor in a mostly Democrat city. So we're think of ourselves as highly evolved racially. That somehow we're beyond uh, racism, or that we understand it better. But I started talking to a couple of black men that I was working with at the time. One, they became our executive producers of the documentary, and one is Brandon Logan,
Yeah.
very
Great guy.
successful real
Great
estate
guy.
developer. Yeah, and the other one is Seymour Battle, who is the highest ranking black executive at Valero.
Hmm.
He's a senior VP. He was in charge of all the Valero Texas Open golf tournament and a million other things that where Valero gets involved in the community. But we were doing a business transaction at the time, and I mentioned this to him. You know, what do you guys think about this whole George Floyd thing? And isn't it easier here in San Antonio? And Brandon answered immediately, and he said, "Let me tell you about the daily challenge of living in my skin.
Mm.
The daily challenge of living in my skin in San Antonio."
Wow.
Uh, Seymour then began adding his stories. Uh, they're both very high income executives. They
Mm.
dress beautifully. One owns a BMW, the other one the most expensive Mercedes you can find. But
Mhm.
he says they
Mm.
still get pulled over in San
Wow.
Antonio.
Wow.
That if they're jogging in their own neighborhood, which is not a predominantly black neighborhood, that it's just a matter of time before someone reports them as a suspicious character,
Mm.
uh, and on and on and on and on and on with stories that I had not even imagined.
Wow.
So I said, "Does every black man have a story like that?" He said, "Oh, you bet." So I started just asking black men.
Mm.
I would just go to them at a coffee shop or wherever I saw one, and I would tell me your story. Have you ever been pulled over? Do you have any stories that you don't tell anybody? Maybe you tell your black friends, but you never told any white people. Oh, do I ever?
Wow.
Do I ever have
Wow.
stories?
Well, I'll tell you what, Lionel, I'm going to ask you to take a long view in this before we bring our next guest in. Over your eight decades as, a prominent Hispanic leader in this nation, what progress have you seen us make on social justice? And what's the road we still need to travel?
Well, I think it depends on how far back you go. You know, if you go to the days of the 20s and 30s and 40s, where in San Antonio and around San Antonio, you would still see signs that said no Negroes or Mexicans allowed. You go back to the 1930s. If you go back to the 50s, when I was a kid and I was growing up, uh, colored people went to the back of the bus. Every theater, a very big theater, had the colored balcony. There were separate drinking fountains and that type of thing. And if you go back to that, have we made progress? Absolutely, we've made progress. When you see a man being killed by a white policeman, it's a version of a lynching that went on 150 years ago and 100 years ago and 75 years ago, but it was nevertheless a modern day lynching. People actually watched a black man being killed by a
Mm.
white person. So it's something that still goes on. Yeah, we've made progress, but does it still go on? You know it does. And right now the trial is going on, and I think any of us that have been keeping abreast of that are really understanding how brutal that that murder was.
I'd like to bring my next guest in, but before I do that, I want to acknowledge not both these gentlemen are way too talented and have done a lot for social justice, but they have their family members have profoundly altered the course of Jim Eskin. It was Lionel's younger brother, Robert. We worked together when we were communication peers. And then he made the first switch to fundraising. And then I needed to get a new gig. And he said, Jim, if I can do it, you could do it. So I would not be doing this if it wasn't for Robert Sosa. And the other, I was so fortunate to have as a mentor the father of our next guest, Seth Riklin, also is ridiculously talented. You know, Seth, I'm proud if I could say one thing. Do I read you've been a practicing accountant, a practicing attorney, a pilot, and of course you are president of a solar and wind energy company. And of course we are here today as chair of the executive board of B'nai B'rith International, which is one of the world's oldest and leading Jewish service organizations. And also it gave birth to something called the Anti-Defamation League. Could you take a minute to talk about the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League?
Sure. I guess the easiest response to your introduction is I guess I get bored easily, and so I always like a challenge, which is not unlike my father. As you know, he was always looking for a challenge, and
Amen.
you know, and fortunately for San Antonio and for a lot of other communities, his challenges were focused on giving back and being involved with various charities. And it was incredible how many leadership roles he took on. And like you, he was my mentor, and I'm miss him every day. And I'm just thankful that he put me on this path. So getting back to your question, I'm a member of ADL. I don't speak for ADL. B'nai B'rith keeps me very busy, but let's talk about ADL. ADL started, you know, B'nai B'rith has been an incubator for a lot of different Jewish organizations that have spun off. And ADL is probably the most, it definitely is the most successful of all those. And for today's program, it's really crucially important in that the ADL started out to fighting anti-Semitism, but it's now grown into much bigger shoes, and it fights for justice and fairness for all. And it fights domestic extremism here in the United States. It fights against racism and all forms of hate. They have an incredible education program that they you know, anti-bullying, cyberbullying, anti-bias, interfaith work, but they really are in the forefront of fighting discrimination and securing justice for all groups, including LGBTQ, and today, and most importantly, voting rights. They are very active in voting rights. You know, you talked about, you know, how things have changed, and it wasn't that long ago where that the Chief Justice of our U.S. Supreme Court wrote an opinion in a case that basically gutted the Voting Rights Act. And at the time, the focus of his opinion was that the world has changed, the U.S. has changed, and that you know, racism is a thing of the past, and we don't do those things. So we really don't need this Voting Rights Act anymore. It's now no longer necessary. And yet today, several years after that opinion was written, we're now seeing that is sadly not the case. And whether we're talking about the untimely death of George Floyd, or whether we're talking about efforts to change the game in terms of limiting how people vote, there's a lot of active efforts going on that look a lot like, as you started the conversation, with what was going on in the 30s in Germany. And it's something that we all have to be aware of and do our best to be actively anti-racist and to fight these things.
Seth and Lionel, whether you like it or not, I have a lot of difficult questions. So what do you say we get underway? The last year, if anything, showed us a significant widening of the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And the truth is, if you had wealth before COVID, you probably have more wealth now. And if you weren't so fortunate, you're probably even less fortunate. And as a result, we've seen people of color disproportionately suffer from hospitalizations, death, loss of job financially. My question is, and that leads to some erosion of trust in our leaders and our organizations. What can nonprofits help do to rebuild that trust? Let's start with Lionel.
Well, I think nonprofit is no different than a small business, a large business, a corporation. I think it's just making a serious effort to treat everybody the same, regardless of the color of their skin, their sex, sexual orientation, or whatever it is, that you can really, really make it an effort to see everybody as a complete equal. Because as human beings, that's what we are. We are complete equals. The intelligence level is the same for everyone. Uh, and because you're maybe less educated doesn't mean that you're less intelligent. Because you are of a lesser income doesn't mean that you don't want to work, that you don't care for your family. You know, stuff happens that is not pleasant. In mostly it happens uh, in poor families, but it happens to all families. And
Yeah.
I think we need to make conscious effort to try to understand other people, reach out to people who are different than you, that come from that are from a different race, or that come from a different socioeconomic group, or that are different from you in any way, and you will find that there is no difference. People that you might think aren't quite as intelligent, you will find that they are, and that you might think are dangerous, you will find that they're not, or
Mm,
that you might think are menacing, you will find that they're not, that they're
right.
just like you.
Seth, would you want to respond to that about what role nonprofits can do in restoring trust?
Sure. I think the key thing is making an active effort to look for policies both within your organization and in the organizations that you interface with that affect people of different color, race, gender differently, merely because they're different. I grew up working in B'nai B'rith and became chair of the board. We are the largest provider of low-income housing in the Jewish world. And when I say that, but we're HUD properties, and we do not even ask, we're not allowed to ask anyone any of the protected questions about their religion or color or their sex, any of those things we don't ask. And so we provide housing for everyone and anyone who is a low income senior. And we are very proud of what we do. We have 8,000 tenants across the United States, 24 buildings. And it's important for us, as a landlord, we follow the HUD guidelines to a T in making sure that we protect everyone equally and treat everyone equally. And I think that's a good cornerstone for every nonprofit to adopt, both in terms of diversity of who you serve, but in terms of who are your leaders, who are on your board of directors.
Let me thank you. I want to go to a very timely question. You know, over the last year, we've seen a very significant spike in racism and abuse aimed at Asian Americans. What would be your thoughts on how nonprofits can stand up against such racism? Let's start with Seth this time.
Well, the Anti-Defamation League has started a tremendous program. They just funded a large study about Asian hate crimes. And are showing that, by reaching out and educating people. I mean, I guess the simplest thing, to me, is that the root of most of these acts of hate, most of acts of racism, of anti-Semitism, are rooted in ignorance. The ignorance of not understanding who you're living in this world with. Their skin color doesn't make them different than you. What church or what church they go to doesn't make them different than you. Just being willing to treat everyone equally and give everyone an opportunity for you to get to know them. Don't judge a book by its cover, as what has been said. And I think that's really important. And unfortunately, we live in a time, because of the tribalism in our society that we've seen in the last 6 years, where there are a lot of people who would have been quiet, who would not have said ugly things or done ugly things, have now felt that they've been, from the highest level of our government, been given an okay to speak out, an okay to speak out on behalf of their race. And we've witnessed a rise in all sorts of crimes against others that we in my lifetime, I've never seen or thought that I would ever see in our United States.
Yeah. Lionel, would you like to respond to the question about racism directed at Asian Americans?
I am have certainly not studied that history, but I do know how easy it is for a lot of people and comedians and so forth to make fun of the way Asians talk, and even that movie that we all love that they play every Christmas time, when the whole family wound up not having a Christmas and having to go to this Chinese restaurant, and you may remember the scene where they're all singing fa ra 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 ra, and it everybody howls with laughter and everything like that. And yeah, it's funny, but a lot of the racism does start with jokes that most people think are harmless. Certainly a lot of black jokes when I was a kid. Whoa, there were black jokes galore. And I think that jokes that make fun of other people or groups or races have really fallen out of favor. They are no longer considered funny, and they're considered offensive, which they are, because those jokes did not see everybody as equal. There was whether it was the old Polish jokes back in the past, implying that Polish were not as smart and so forth. So there's always been, as Seth says, because we're tribal, as humans, we're tribal. We are most comfortable with people that look like us, that think like us, that dress like us, that like the same things that we do. That's our natural comfort level, and that's a human trait, and that's okay. But that doesn't mean that it's okay to treat others as lesser. So I agree with says you got to make a conscious effort to have everybody speak their part and to have everybody be able to express the type of challenges that they face. I have not had a conversation with an Asian person on this in the last month or two since this incident in Atlanta happened. But I'm going to, because I may learn as much as I have learned from the black men of things that I was completely unaware of and just completely ignorant.
Hey, at this time, I'd like to introduce our producer, Michael Largent with Game Day Media. Michael, can you tell our audience there are two ways they can share questions and comments? They can type it into the chat space, but better yet, we can bring them right on camera. Can you explain how to do that?
Sure thing. So if you have any questions while you're listening, we have it set so that you are able to turn on your camera and unmute yourself if you want to ask those questions in person. If you don't want to do that, you can also type them, but we'd love to actually get you on camera or get your voice to hear the questions from you firsthand. So those are your two options.
Thank you, Michael. And by the way, we have a little tradition. At this point in the webinar, we'd like everybody to type in the words nonprofit strong. And I'm going to ask you, Lionel, what are we?
Nonprofit strong.
Seth, what are we?
We are nonprofit strong.
You are both right. Again, you're both overachieving, but I'm used to that. Let us continue. I'm going to throw a few curveballs, okay? Many white people, deservedly so, resent being lumped into a category that can be described as privilege. What can nonprofits do to combat that impression that all white people are privileged?
Well, you know, on that, Jim, I think I've heard many white men say, man, it's hard to be a white man. Because everybody thinks that we're the evil guy and that somehow we're responsible for many of the evils of the world. And we're the ones that get left out. But there are really, when you look at America today and you look at the groups who feel that they're being left out, you could include so many groups. You know, it could be the indigenous people.
Mm-hmm.
It can be the poor people. It can be senior women. It can be younger women in the workforce. The list goes on and on and on and on about folks who feel that they are not considered as important as others, and that feel that they don't have an equal voice, and that feel that they need to express themselves in a different and more important way. And I think that the conversations are opening up to that a little bit, whether it's a gay or lesbian person or a transsexual or a Jew or anybody else, you know, that feels that somehow or other the world has misunderstood them. And certainly at some points it was much worse than that. But that unconscious bias, that unconscious racism exists in most human beings in some manner or form, just due to the fact that we don't understand everything, not because we have necessarily because we have a closed mind to others, although some people do. They feel that they somehow need to stay above the who they are is more important than who other people are. Yeah. And you know, I think that you're right, Seth. I think that the leadership of the President of the United States allowed folks, gave them the right to express what they felt all along. You know, at one point they put on white hoods, but they no longer have to do that to go out there and tear down the U.S. Capitol, etc. You know, because you know, they feel that they're privileged and somehow something is being taken away from them, perhaps. But it's tough, and it'll start to work itself out. But we do need to address all the issues of everybody who feels left out, including the white male.
I'm going to go to Seth now. You're a lawyer and a pilot and an accountant. That makes me mad. I can't be one of those. Let's try some basic terms of diversity, equity, inclusion. What does diversity mean to you?
To me, it means if I'm having a group meeting, if I'm part of a group of people that is doing anything, I want to have as many different colors of skin, as many different religions, as many different genders, as many different international backgrounds as I possibly can on that at that table, because it is, to me, one of the greatest things of living is learning. And I'm always surprised at the things that come out of people's mouth in just random conversation, and even more so when you're working together to accomplish a single goal. And so to me, it's just including as many people as you can actively, and you end up with a much better result. The more voices you have, the better the result.
And let's the other terms, equity, inclusion. What do they mean to you? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're kind of together, but they're different.
Well, it's one thing to include people, but it's a different thing to treat everyone the same, to treat everyone with the same level of equity. And it's important, to always have your antennas up and be aware that what you think, that all people are being treated the same, that's not, you can't assume that. And, one of the things that COVID has helped us to uncover, sadly, is that in a number of our major hospitals, as well as minor hospitals, that people are treated differently. Now, we already knew people were treated differently based on whether they had health insurance or not.
Right.
But now we're finding with COVID that when people present and they're in dire health, in a catastrophic situation, because of their skin, some hospitals are treating people differently and using different protocols. They may only vary slightly. It may be small differences, but there shouldn't be any differences. We should all be treated the same.
Right. Hey, Lionel, I'm going to give you a tough question. Is it good enough never to say anything racist yourself, but to remain silent when you hear a racist comment?
Well, I think it is sometimes hard to call somebody out if they make an overt racist comment. But I think it has to be done. I think people who are being discriminated against need to not just call it out, but to videotape it so that people can see themselves. Because when most of us are unconsciously biased in some way, and some of us are very careful that we don't ever express it, and others are expressing it and they don't even know they're expressing it in a way that offends somebody else. I think all of the women who are on the call, who especially have been in any organization or any business, knows that even though more women are seated at the table these days in business meetings, if there's men around, men talk louder, men think they're smarter, men think they have the answers, and a woman can express an opinion which is smarter than anything the men are saying, and somehow the men don't hear it. And somebody has to call that out as well, saying, Mary Ann just made the best remark, I think, of this meeting. This is what she said, because nobody hears it. And then 10 minutes later, a man says the same thing she just said. Nobody heard her, but everybody heard him. And that happens over and over and over again. And it's this unconscious bias that men just have. Now more and more women are going into middle management. And if it's an all women meeting, they tend to listen to each other in a much more open way. And I'm not sure that men are as evolved as we should be in making sure that we're listening to every opinion. It's one thing to have people, a diverse group at our table. It's another to treat them, as Seth says, all alike. And it's still another to believe that they all have the same importance at that table and that every opinion is has equal weight. I think that's the last thing that really says, okay, we've got a diverse table, and we promoted it openly. We're going to call out anything that we feel is racist and talk about it, and we're going to listen to everybody with a mindset that everybody is as smart and everybody has the same to contribute.
Hey, before we bring Joel in, I have a really tough question. I'll start with Seth, sorry, and then we'll go to Lionel. What do you do if you have a major donor says something racist in your company?
Well, I'm going to have to treat this as a hypothetical because fortunately with B'nai B'rith, I've never had that occur. But you know, if you know, but I am sure a number of the people on this call have had that done. You know, and whether it's racist, whether it's anti-Semitic, whether it's anti-Asian, whether it's anti-woman, it's important. You know, you've got to have values, and you've got to find a, you know, as one of our guests mentioned, you know, silence is acquiescence, you know, is consent. And you've got to find a way to speak up. Even if you do it in the most genteel way possible, you still have to call that donor out and try to educate him. You know, the goal of this, you know, when you realize that it's all rooted in ignorance, it's all about trying to gently educate people to do the right thing. And the trick is just finding a way to say that in a genteelly. And, you know, if that major donor takes offense, you know, maybe you just need to find a better major donor.
Hey, and before we bring Joel in, I want to give Lionel a crack. What do? You have a major donor that acts racist. What do you do?
You know, I have to say that I agree with Seth. I'm not sure. I think major donors tend to be highly, if they're there to consider making a gift to your organization, especially if it's a major gift, that they tend to be more highly evolved. So I think, and everybody is more aware the higher level they are, especially when they're funding nonprofits, that type of behavior would not be correct. So I have not heard it from that. I used to hear it, a type of racism. When I was in the advertising business, we specialized in Hispanic advertising. So there was always in these big corporations, whether it was Burger King or Coca-Cola or Anheuser-Busch, whoever they were, they always had somebody in charge of minority outreach, minority marketing, minority advertising, somebody who was a minority, and they were usually black. And in those meetings, you know, my bosses were all black. And I began to hear a lot of the stories about that. And we would sit and complain about the white management almost at every company, you know, because, you know, they did treat us as something they had to do. Okay, we need to do this. Okay, it's Black History Month. What are we going to do? Okay, I had one client, I won't mention the name of the company, that gave us a very large contract. This was not a nonprofit, this was a corporation. Uh, and the guy that was assigned to oversee us had just been given this job. He was an older fellow, as white as he could be, and he had always been in charge of, well, I'll tell you the name of the company because they got in all kinds of trouble anyway. It was Texaco back at the time when they were having all kinds of problems with minorities, the way that they were treating them and paying them and all that kind of thing. And the first meeting where he came to San Antonio, he says, I don't even know what I'm doing here. I don't know why they are doing, we're doing Hispanic outreach. We're not even in trouble with the Hispanics. We're in trouble with the African Americans. I don't even know why we're doing this, and I hate it that I'm not in charge of the Metropolitan Opera anymore, and I hate this job, and I hate what I'm having to do now, what they're making me do. Hello, okay, well, thank you very much. Now, shall we go on about our business? You know, I mean, it happened a lot many years ago. It happens today, but it's not nearly as stark.
Hey, Joel, you've been very patient. Did you have a question or comment you wanted to share?
Yes, I'd like to ask each of the people speaking about values. What three things do you value most in your life? What three things do you value most in your life?
Why don't you put them on the spot? Okay, we'll start with Lionel.
Okay, the things that I value most is teaching my children, grandchildren, not my children because they already learned or didn't learn and they're all old now. But my grandchildren and great grandchildren about the things that are important. And values are more important than being smart. Values like complete honesty, thoughtfulness, a good work ethic, a faith in God, a belief of family, being a good father, being a good mother, having the proper skills to give love fully and openly to your children, and yet be able to guide them in a way that has the discipline that they know what's right and what's wrong. Uh, I feel that that's what I missed as a younger man, trying to pursue a career and trying to always be there for the clients instead of my children. Uh, I made it very hard for them, and it's and it's taken years to repair, my relationships with my children. Thank goodness that all eight of them uh, are okay with me, and that we can express love to each other, and that we can tell each other whatever we want to say to each other and not feel offended or not feel hurt anymore because uh, treating people well, being a full rounded human being is based in strong values that I want to pass on to them and hope that they will pass on to their
Hey,
children.
Seth, I'll tell you what, we're going to simplify that a little. How about if you pick your top value?
That's easy. Just being kind and considerate to everyone I meet, everyone I come across. And when I can, if I can do something, just some random act of kindness to a stranger every day, that makes my day.
Okay, I have another question.
Could I have my values?
No, we'll get to. Sure, go ahead, Joel.
My three values are God is
God.
number one, family and friends is number two, and number three is country,
Okay,
this democracy.
okay. Thank you. Thank you. Let me see. Let me start with Lionel this time. Is it okay for a person to tell a racist joke if it's about their own group? Get it? Can I tell a racist joke, say about Jewish people if I'm Jewish? You're Latino, can you tell a Latino joke if you're a Latino?
Well, my dad had a million Mexican jokes, and they were all. I wouldn't repeat any of them today. They're funny as hell, but I would not repeat them. And I think uh, that's just not viewed in the same way anymore. They can be funny, but they can also be racist and they can also be hurtful. So if they're funny and hurtful, then they're not funny. And you know that's why shows that were so funny and so popular in the old days, like Amos and Andy and so forth, you can watch those shows today, and I can tell you that they are really, really funny. Are they racist? Well, they are racist in that Amos and Andy and all their friends used to be. Uh, it was like an insight into the true black life and how sneaky and cunning they were. And I mean, but they're funny, you know. Would they be on the air right now? Hell no. Uh, Values have changed, and I think we're more aware of what we say and do. And I don't think I've made a funny. Well, I do to Kathy and to people and to my kids, because they are funny, but I wouldn't repeat them to anybody today.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, Michael, any other at the moment? I got plenty of more questions, but any other questions from the audience at this point?
It doesn't look like anyone's typed in any questions, but yeah. So right now, if any of you people listening have any questions, now you should be able to just turn on your camera and your microphone and jump on if you'd like to do that at any point.
Okay, but I got a nice stash of questions ready. I'm going to go with Seth this time. Hey, what do you do? Social media. You're on social media, and you notice a coworker who's making racist comments on social media outside the work environment. What should you do?
Well, to the extent that, if you're working for a large employer these days, most large employers have codes of conduct and that they expect all their employees to honor. And they expect that to be honored both in and outside of the office place. So, if you really want to be actively anti-racist, you need to, let your HR department know what's going on. In a smaller employer, you may simply want to privately sit down with that person and say, and let them know that it's just not appropriate, that what they say online doesn't just color, people's perception of that individual, but they represent the company and your co-employer, and it reflects on you negatively, and you don't appreciate it.
Thank you. Lionel?
Hey, Jim, can I
Please,
jump in real quick?
Sure.
I'll go you one better on the last question. And it's not only the coworker, but it is also people that are on your feed that could be friends from childhood that may say something that you may not even know about.
By the way, who's this talking?
This is Wayne Terry. I'm sorry.
Hey, Wayne Terry, how are you doing?
Good, Jim. Good.
How come we can't see you on camera? We thank you for your leadership to the community.
Oh no, I'm showing myself on camera. I'm not sure why you can't see me.
Maybe I don't. But continue, Wayne, it's great to have you part of our learning community.
Absolutely.
And maybe too, I got a real tough one. Lionel and Seth, and then Wayne. Let's going to pick on Wayne. How many chances should a staff member, a board member, a donor, volunteer get when they make a racist comment? Should they be given a second chance? Should they be given a third chance? How many chances do they get? Let's start with Seth.
Well, I would tell you that for my organization, it's one strike and you're out.
Okay.
I mean, that really reflects on the organization, and it reflects poorly on them, and it reflects poorly on everyone who's involved in the organization. So one strike and you're out.
Okay. Okay. How about you, Lionel? How many strikes?
I'd like for Wayne to go first. He
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I should have said that. Wayne?
No, that's okay. It is one strike and you're out. Most companies today have a zero tolerance policy, and that's exactly what it means. Zero tolerance.
I would agree with that.
Hey, I'm going to ask all three of you. I'll start with Wayne. And Wayne didn't know he's going to get picked on. Wayne, when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, who are your role models?
For diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's a good question. When I first got into the role of diversity at HEB in the late 90s, there really weren't a whole bunch of role models out there. And I had to look to people that I knew in the community that had a passion for equality. And so they became my role models, because at that time, diversity was only in a few companies. And so it became very, very obvious to me in the beginning that HEB was started. I'll be very honest, probably people know about it. It started with a class action lawsuit by some African Americans on the warehouse side. on problems with promotions and everything else. And before I know it, I'm sitting in front of the owner of the company, and he's asking me if I've had any issues. I wasn't part of the class action specifically that had been meeting, but it gave us an opportunity to talk about diversity, and that word that people didn't know what it was. But in the first 5 years, I'll say this: in the first 5 years that we worked with our diversity council, it was a bad word, and so people, when they heard you coming, they called me the diversity police, and all kinds of wonderful names like that. But it took a long time, and I think that Lionel made the comment earlier that all the managers were Black in the beginning. And so my first diversity conference, I walked into it. It was in Houston, and there were probably 200 people there. There were about 30 Hispanics, and the rest were all African Americans. that was diversity. And so we became each other's role models and each other's leaders.
Yeah. Hey, Seth, how about you? Who are your role models when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Jim, you will not be surprised to know that it's my father. He was put up to be a member of the downtown San Antonio Rotary, which at that time had no Jews, had no Blacks, had no Hispanics in it. He was blackballed. And fortunately, he had a good friend who was the publisher of the San Antonio Light, who didn't like the way he was treated. And he went to those people who blackballed him and said, I have a candidate that I want to put up for the Rotary, and I need you to be on my committee to make sure he gets in. Well, no one is going to go against the gentleman who buys his ink by the barrel. And my father became a member of the downtown Rotary. He immediately got involved in the recruiting part of it, and began bringing in African Americans, Hispanics, and other Jews and women, and because there were also no women, to diversify the San Antonio downtown Rotary. And to his credit, they ended up creating, because there was a large issue of dropouts in San Antonio, they created the largest high school anti-dropout program ever done in the United States.
Diploma Plus.
Diploma Plus, and it still exists. And he is, like I said, I miss him every day.
Yeah, me too. Lionel, who are you?
I would say with my father as well. He was very different from my mother. My mother, I think, was pretty racist. She really thought that the Blacks should sit at the back of the bus. Those were the rules. That they should live in their own neighborhoods and they should stay away from us, and that we shouldn't go play with Black kids. And my father was quite the opposite. My father would take us to the movies at the Majestic Theater, but if you went in the front door, it was 60 cents. And then when we got to be teens, once you're past 12, you have to pay the 60 cents too. So we would go to the color balcony, but because that was a nickel. Can you imagine 60 cents to the front door and 5 cents for the colored balcony, which was I think the fourth balcony. It was so high you could barely see the screen. But when he took us to the movies. That's where we went to the movies, and we had. He just was very, very not overly reaching out, but wanting to be in their company, because to him they were working people just like him. He owned a laundry and a cleaners, and he worked 12 hours a day in the heat and the steam and in the gasoline, the naphtha that cleaned the clothes and so forth. So he just saw them as decent working men, not different from himself.
Mm-hmm. Hey, we're beginning to sum up. Let me start with Lionel and go to Seth. I mean, this is a big subject. You're a nonprofit. Where do you start? You're a nonprofit, and you were listening to Lionel and Seth and Wayne and Joel. We want to be not just racist, we want to be actively anti-racist. Where do you start the journey? I mean, becoming actively anti-racist as a nonprofit? Lionel?
Well, I think it's by reaching out and understanding. It's and wanting to understand and wanting to know people different from us. And I really have started on that on that journey with this documentary and with the portraits. But that's just the beginning. I want to make sure that the conversation continues, and that I do everything that I can to help it continue and continue with more people. I do find that there are a lot of people out there who are have their hearts open and but are ignorant of a lot of what's happening and want to know more and want to do their part. I think there's just so many people that are wanting to know more, wanting to help, wanting to be more open and have these conversations. Invite somebody that that maybe we've known for a long time that we've never invited to dinner, or to lunch or to coffee. But I think dinner at my house with several Black families is my first goal, and then just talk about things that interest us both, whether it's race or whether it's travel or whether it's business. You know, what do we have in common? What are the things that that make us like each other? And I think that that's what I'm going to be doing a lot more. I know that.
Seth, you're a nonprofit, and you really want to move from anti-racist to actively anti-racist. What are some of the first steps in that journey?
The first step is always being aware and not in denial. And in terms of looking at all your policies and looking at ways that you can ensure equity and fairness for all the people you serve, as well as everyone on your board, as well as all of your employees. In terms of ADL, they're actively involved domestically, fighting both anti-Semitism, fighting racism, and they have lots of opportunities, whether it's in your local schools, to attending hearings on voting rights, to get active in your community and make a difference. In terms of B'nai B'rith, we're worldwide, and we're the oldest Jewish charity, started in 1843. And we're also one of the oldest NGOs at the United Nations. And I've spent a good part of the last 3 weeks on Zoom calls, because we can't go there in person, with ambassadors from countries around the world at the United Nations Human Rights Council, which
Wow.
the United States is not a party of right now, and as well as the United States, as well as UNESCO, and making a difference in talking about these issues on an international basis and how we solve these problems on a worldwide basis. And finally, I would say that it's very important for each one of us to think about doing something that someone who I have a great deal of respect for, who's a fellow University of Texas alumni, Emmanuel Acho, and that is being open to having uncomfortable conversations with people and being willing to share ideas and learn from them and let them learn from you, and build bridges that will allow us to all unite together in fighting hate wherever it raises its head.
Well said. We have time for one more question from the audience. Michael, is there anything in the chat room or anybody who would like to come on the screen?
I don't see it. Yeah, I was gonna say,
Hey,
Wayne,
Jim.
do you want to come back? Yeah.
Yeah. So here's a couple of things, Jim, and thank you, Lionel, and thank you, Seth, and definitely thank you, Jim, for putting this together.
Yeah.
When I retired from HEB 2 years ago, I started a consulting company, and it's specifically working with nonprofits and small businesses. When the pandemic hit, crashed. Nobody was interested in hiring anybody because they didn't have any money, and everything was just gone bad. I spent 18 years at HEB in diversity management and supplier diversity. And the George Floyd thing happened. So HEB reached out to me to help them not only with their statement, but also to sort of bring up conversations about race. So I put together a presentation called the Frank Discussion on Race. And one of the things that came out of it was that particularly for nonprofits. Nonprofits tend to stay away from tough issues like this unless that's what they're designed to do. But something amazing happened when George Floyd was killed in the manner that he was killed. Like Lionel said, a public lynching. Um, there was a tectonic shift that happened not just in America and not just in a regional area of America, but all over the world. And so we saw countries that that had their own strife, but they were marching for George Floyd. We saw towns in Kansas with a population of less than 2% African American, less than 3% diversity overall, and they had 400 to 500 to 600 people marching, almost all Anglo, for George Floyd. In Syria, war-torn country, there was a 25-foot mural on the mountain side of George Floyd in Syria. And so this tectonic shift that happened basically meant that you could no longer stand on the sideline and say, I'm against racism. You could no longer passively be against racism. You have to get involved. And involved doesn't mean you're marching or anything else. But what I had a lot of organizations calling me to give this discussion was, how do we get involved? What can we do? And sometimes it was a matter of just saying Black Lives Matter. Because remember, 3 years ago, every corporation and every organization in the world was afraid to say that. Now they're painting it on streets and everywhere else. And so you don't have to go deeply into it, but at least put something on a website. But before you do that, this is the other part of it. Before you do that, make sure your own house is clean.
Yeah.
And make sure your members and the people you represent are clean. Don't put out a statement and then somebody from your organization is on TV saying, oh, I don't believe in that. And I mean, that kills who you are.
Yeah.
So
That's
you
right,
can't, you just can't be passive about it anymore.
No.
You've got to be involved.
Thank you, Wayne. Lionel, there's only one person on the history of the planet that's both recited a poem at a presidential inauguration and then a few weeks later at the Super Bowl. Who is that?
Well, Amanda Gorman, you've got her right here.
And right here. And I love the spirit. It's the hill we climb. In many ways, the work that we're doing in nonprofits, the work that we're doing towards more racial harmony and social justice, it's a hill we climb. Have we made progress? Yes, but we got more hill to climb. And I would like to thank, this has been a very rich, I only wish we had more time, but I'm going to warn both of you. Seth, Lionel knows this from personal experience. When you do such a great job on the ESCN fundraising training webinars, we invite you back. So you all are going to be invited back. Thank you, Lionel Sosa and Seth Riklin, for the leadership you provided in making this world more socially just. And I want to thank all the members of our learning community for your roles in touching, improving, and saving more lives through your nonprofits. And be safe. And we'll see you next Wednesday. It's going to be partnering with Microsoft. Whose dog is that, by the way? Is that Lionel's dog? Whose dog is that?
Yeah, okay. I'm going to go on mute now.
Okay. Well, listen, Lionel, Seth, thank you very much. Stay safe and look forward to following up. What we'll be doing, we're posting a very short written summary on LinkedIn and Facebook. And then Michael Largent does a magic spin cycle and we edit the recording. And then we're going to post that on LinkedIn and Facebook in probably about 60 to 75 minutes. Okay. So thank you, everyone, for being part of our learning community, and we'll see you next week. Thank you, Seth. Thank you, Lionel. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Wayne. And thank you all to our nonprofit partners.
Thank you, Jim. Let's all go out and make some good trouble for John Lewis.
Amen. Amen to that.